They conditioned you to stay quiet. They trained you to stand at the back of the line. They convinced you that believing in yourself was something to be ashamed of. And while you were shrinking, while you were playing obedient, while you were making yourself small enough for everyone else to feel comfortable, someone else stepped through the door you were standing in front of, claimed everything that was meant for you, and never once looked back. That is what happens when you build your life on a belief system that was never yours to begin with. That is the tax you pay for living inside someone else's comfort zone. Welcome to Dark Mind Implicit. I am not here to lift your mood. Motivation is a tool for people who need to feel something before they move. I am here to reconstruct the lens through which you see yourself, because that lens, the one you are using right now in this exact moment, is either the sharpest weapon you possess or the invisible prison you have been locked inside your entire life without ever realizing the door was always open. Most men move through this world apologizing for the space they take up, shrinking, hesitating, waiting on permission that was never coming. Machiavelli understood something that the weak have never been willing to face. The world does not respond to who you are, it responds to who you are convinced you are. And starting now, that conviction changes. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I move in silence and let my results speak." The identity overhaul. Here is the first truth that almost nobody has the nerve to say directly to your face. You are not behind. You are not damaged. You are not damaged. You are not too far gone. You have simply been living inside an identity that was quietly constructed for you by people who were threatened, consciously or not, by what you would become the moment you finally saw yourself without the filter of their fear. Your parents, your teachers, your neighborhood, the childhood friends who mistook your ambition for arrogance. They did not all lie to you with cruelty. Most of them lied to you with warmth. But hear this without softness and without exception. A comfortable lie, regardless of how gently it was handed to you, is still a cage. And a cage built from good intentions is still a cage. Machiavelli wrote that a man must be willing to see the world exactly as it is, stripped of what he wishes it were. Apply that same ruthless clarity to yourself. Stop seeing yourself as the man who needs conditions to align before he acts. Start seeing yourself as the man who creates the conditions. That single internal pivot is not arrogance. It is not ego inflation. It is the foundational psychological shift that permanently divides the powerful from the people who spend their entire lives watching from the outside. The spectators wait. They comment. They analyze. They hover at the edge of their own moment and wait for it to feel right. The powerful man does not wait for the room to recognize him. He walks in and becomes the measure by which the room is judged. And here is what makes this shift so destabilizing for the world around you. When you change how you see yourself at the core level, you become unmanageable, unpredictable, no longer the man they could count on to fold the moment pressure arrived. The system that has been keeping you in place depends entirely on you believing you are worth less than you are. The instant you stop believing that lie, the system loses every grip it had. See yourself as the architect, never the raw material. Decide your own dimensions, because the world cannot assign you a place if you have already claimed your place with unshakable certainty. The psychology of how you are read. Now let us go somewhere that the power brokers, the manipulators, the ones who move with precision at the top of every room already know. What they spend every day hoping you never figure out. Self-perception is not simply confidence. It is not attitude. It is a signal, a transmission, a frequency that your entire presence broadcasts the moment you enter any space, any negotiation, any conversation, any eye contact. People do not begin with your qualifications. They do not open with your track record, your history, or your stated intentions. They read you first, and within 4 seconds, often without a single word exchanged, they have already decided whether you are someone to be used or someone to be taken seriously. That silent verdict, never announced, never confirmed, will govern every exchange with that person from that point forward. Here is what makes this even more dangerous. The men who get taken advantage of most in any room are not always the weakest men present. They are the men with genuine intelligence, real ability, and actual potential who simply never learned to project a self-image that matched what they were actually capable of delivering. They undersell themselves in negotiations. They over-explain themselves in conversations where silence would have served them far more powerfully. They laugh nervously when they should be completely still. They seek approval when they should be making decisions. And the ones who have studied human behavior with cold precision spot this instantly. They do not see a humble man. They see an opening. Machiavelli understood that perception is not vanity. It is survival infrastructure. The leader who is perceived as certain before he has even demonstrated proof of it commands an entirely different reality than the one who waits for evidence to precede his authority. Understand this about yourself. How you see yourself is how you carry yourself. How you carry yourself is how the world files you. And how the world files you determines every door that opens and every one that stays permanently sealed. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I am the signal, not the noise." The cold architecture of power. Now we descend further. And here is where most people will resist what I am about to say, because it runs directly against the comfortable version of reality that the modern world has been selling you. Power is not distributed. It is not handed out by institutions. It is not awarded to the patient, the loyal, or the deserving. Power is assumed. It is declared. It is seized by the man who decides, in the absolute quiet of his own mind, that he is no longer available to live below the ceiling that others built for him. And that decision, cold, private, unannounced, is where every genuine transformation in history has always actually started. Not in public, not on a stage. In the silence of a man's own thinking, here is what the powerful already accept, that the powerless continue to reject. The world is not a meritocracy. Let that settle completely. The world does not automatically elevate the hardest working man, the most talented man, or the most morally worthy man. It elevates the man who has mastered positioning, the man who understands that reality is, to a significant degree, a negotiation. And in that negotiation, the man who enters, having already determined his own value, who does not flinch when challenged, who does not dissolve when the room pushes back, consistently walks away with far more than the man who simply trusted his effort to speak for itself. Effort is invisible until identity frames it, and identity is either built deliberately by you or assembled by default around you. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Centuries of debate have followed, most of it entirely missing the point. He was not prescribing cruelty, he was describing certainty. A man who is certain, unreadable, immune to emotional manipulation, generates a kind of psychological gravity that others instinctively respect. And yes, calculate around, not fear as in terror, fear as in weight, the kind of presence that causes people to choose their words deliberately, the kind of stillness that recalibrates an entire room the moment you enter it. That is not dominance through aggression, that is dominance through absolute self-mastery. And here is the line that separates the men who leave this feeling inspired from the men who leave this actually different. Inspiration without execution is entertainment. You have been entertained enough. What you need now is a standard, an internal standard that is non-negotiable for how you see yourself, for how you move, for what you are willing to accept from the world around you. The man without a standard can be redirected by any force that arrives. The man with an unshakable internal standard becomes the force itself. Everything reorganizes around him, not because he demanded it with volume, but because his certainty left the world with no other option. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I do not chase, I attract. I do not beg, I become." The art of becoming untouchable. Let me clarify what untouchable actually means, because the word gets distorted constantly by people who think it refers to invincibility, to immunity from pain, to existing beyond consequence. That is not what it means. Untouchable does not mean nothing can reach you. It means nothing can move you without your explicit permission. It means you have constructed such a defined, fortified, unshakable sense of exactly who you are and precisely what you stand for, that the chaos outside, the opinions, the betrayals, the setbacks, the relentless noise, all of it crashes against you the way water crashes against stone. It does not penetrate. It does not reroute you. It simply dissipates while you remain exactly where you chose to stand, exactly who you chose to be. That is the internal architecture of the untouchable man. Now understand this. The world will test it not once, not twice, continuously. Because people, consciously and unconsciously, are always probing for the edge where your certainty ends and your insecurity begins. This is not paranoia. This is the honest observation of human nature that Machiavelli built his entire framework upon. The man who folds under that probing teaches the world precisely how to handle him. The man who holds, who does not explain himself, who does not justify his position, who simply remains unmoved, teaches the world something categorically different. He teaches it that there are no edges to locate, that the boundary extends as far as vision allows, and people do not endlessly push against something that shows no sign of yielding. This is where Machiavellianism and Stoicism converge into something genuinely formidable. The Stoics established that the only territory truly under your authority is your own mind, your own judgment, your own response to whatever reality places in front of you. Machiavelli established that the man who masters his external positioning, who comprehends how power moves and how perception manufactures reality, becomes a force that bends circumstances rather than being bent by them. Combine those two frameworks inside a single man, and what emerges is something the world encounters rarely and never forgets. A man who is internally sovereign and externally precise. A man who registers everything and is relocated by nothing. A man who sees the game being played around him with full clarity, selects his moves with cold intention, and executes without hesitation and without apology. But here is what nobody warns you about in the process of becoming untouchable. It demands a level of self-honesty that is genuinely uncomfortable. Because before you can build the fortress, you have to walk through every room of who you currently are, including the dark rooms, the embarrassing rooms, the rooms where your rationalizations were born and your fears have been living rent-free, and you have to look at all of it without blinking. The man who refuses to face himself clearly will never be able to present himself powerfully. The fractures you avoid internally will always surface externally at the worst possible moment, in front of the worst possible audience. Self-awareness is not softness. It is the bedrock upon which every lasting form of power is constructed. So here is what I am asking of you. Not tomorrow, not once you feel sufficiently ready, because that feeling will not arrive on its own. Right now, begin constructing the version of yourself you have been deferring. Define with sharp and uncompromising precision who that man is, how he thinks, how he speaks, what he accepts and what he does not, where he is headed, and why nothing will prevent his arrival. Write it down. Say it out loud in a room where no one can hear you, because the declaration matters. The internal commitment is the first stone in the foundation of the identity you are now building. Every empire in history began not with the first brick laid in the wall, but with the unshakable decision in one man's mind that the wall would exist. You are that man. This is that moment. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I am building something the world is not ready for." Silence, strategy, and the power of being misread. Here is something the powerful have known across centuries that the average man was never taught and will likely spend his entire life without grasping. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is not absence. Silence is not what is left when there is nothing to say. Silence is a weapon. Arguably the most sophisticated, most misread, and most underdeployed weapon available to any man serious about building and protecting power. The man who has mastered silence has mastered something that most people are constitutionally incapable of, because silence demands the one thing that the modern world has been systematically dismantling in men for decades: patience. Stillness. the ability to sit inside discomfort without immediately reaching for relief through explanation, justification, or the desperate need to be understood by people who were never equipped to understand you in the first place. Let me be direct. You have been over-explaining yourself your entire life, defending your choices to people who had no authority over your path, sharing your vision with individuals whose only qualification was that they were nearby, not that they were wise. And every time you opened your mouth to justify who you are or where you were going to someone who never asked in good faith, you surrendered power. You handed someone a map to your insecurities and called it transparency. Real honesty does not require a crowd. Real confidence does not require approval. And real power does not require an explanation. The lion does not walk through the jungle announcing his strategy to the other animals. He moves, he acts, and the results speak in a language that requires no translation. Machiavelli was unambiguous on this point. He wrote that men judge more by their eyes than by their hands because everyone can observe, but very few can truly feel. In the language of power, this means one devastating and simple thing. What people witness you do carries infinitely more weight than what you tell them you intend to do. Your words are common currency in a world overflowing with declarations. Your actions, your silence, your consistency in the complete absence of applause, these are the rare currencies that retain their value. The man who constantly announces his plans is spending influence he has not yet generated. The man who moves without announcement and allows his results to precede his reputation creates a kind of gravity that no amount of self-promotion can manufacture. And now the part that would be hardest to accept. Being misunderstood is not a problem requiring a solution. It is a toll that must be paid. Every man who has ever operated above the level of the crowd has been misread by that crowd. They called him arrogant when he was simply certain. They called him cold when he was simply disciplined. They called him distant when he was simply selective. They called him fortunate when he was simply prepared. Being misread is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is confirmation that you are operating on a frequency the untrained ear cannot yet receive, and your only obligation in that moment is to remain consistent. Keep constructing, keep advancing. Refuse with everything you have the temptation to descend to a level of explanation that was designed entirely to make others comfortable at the direct cost of your momentum. Mystery is leverage. The man who is completely known is completely predictable. The man who is completely predictable can be completely managed, but the man who reveals himself with intention rather than impulse, who allows the space of silence to be filled by the imagination of others, that man holds a psychological advantage that no title and no amount of capital can directly purchase. Scarcity produces value. This applies to commodities, it applies to information, and it applies with absolute precision to how much of yourself you choose to expose to a world that has not yet demonstrated it deserves full access to who you are and what you are becoming. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "My silence is my strategy and my results are my voice." The enemy within, dismantling the version of you that kept you small. Everything we have built means nothing if you refuse to face the most dangerous adversary you will ever encounter. He does not live outside you. He is not in the people who doubted you or the systems that overlooked you. He lives inside you. And he is sophisticated precisely because he does not attack loudly. He arrives quietly, reasonably, in a voice that sounds exactly like your own. He is the version of you that kept you small, the one who dressed fear as wisdom, who called hesitation careful thinking, who whispered you are not ready every single time you stood at the edge of something that could have changed everything. His weapon is not defeat, it is delay. One more day, one more month, one more year, until the weight of waiting quietly crushes the ambition out of you so completely you forget it was ever there. Machiavelli was clear. The most catastrophic losses are never inflicted externally. They happen when a man becomes his own opposition, when inner resistance overpowers inner drive. You do not negotiate with that part of yourself. You identify it. Name what it has cost you, hold it accountable, and then remove it permanently from the operating system of your mind. You are not that man anymore. That chapter is sealed. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I have outgrown the version of me that was afraid." How the powerful actually live. Most content is engineered to make you feel elevated, not to make you more effective. And the distance between those two things is everything. Feeling elevated is temporary. Being more effective is structural. One fades by Tuesday, the other rebuilds you permanently. And what produces that permanent rebuild is not a goal, not a vision board, not an affirmation, a standard. A goal is something you reach toward. A standard is something you refuse to fall beneath. The powerful man does not begin his day chasing a goal. He begins it maintaining a standard that governs everything. His time, his circle, his decisions, what he accepts from others, and more critically, what he accepts from himself. Machiavelli observed that the most consequential men in history were not the most gifted. They were the men who held the highest standards and built environments that enforced them without exception. The dark implicit standard is not perfection, it is direction. The absolute refusal to drift. You become the most demanding presence in your own life, quietly, without an audience, without applause, and eventually the world mirrors it back, not on your timeline, but inevitably. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "My standard is my identity, and my identity is untouchable." The world rearranges when everything begins to shift. This is where everything converges into one undeniable truth. The truth Machiavelli understood. The truth every man who has ever risen from obscurity to consequence discovered not through theory, but through lived, costly experience. When you genuinely alter how you think about yourself, the world does not simply respond. It rearranges, structurally. Your daily reality begins reorganizing itself around the new frequency you are transmitting. Opportunities invisible to your former identity become visible. The right people appear. The wrong ones fall away. Doors that seemed permanently sealed reveal they were simply waiting for a man who believed he had the right to knock. This is not mysticism. It is the inevitable consequence of a man operating from a higher internal reference point. Perception shifts behavior. Behavior shifts decisions. Decisions shift results. And results compounded over time shift reality entirely. But understand this, the rearrangement will not always feel like reward. Sometimes it feels like loss. People exit. Comfort zones suffocate you. That is not failure, that is friction. The snake does not mourn the skin it sheds. It simply moves forward into territory its former self could never have reached. You are in that process right now. The shedding is not the end. It is the beginning. Become what the world cannot ignore. This is where it ends, and this is where you truly begin. Everything across these 9 parts was not philosophy for the sake of argument. It was a dismantling, precise, deliberate. Every false conviction, every borrowed limitation, every comfortable lie that stood between you and the man you were always supposed to become. You arrived here as one version of yourself. If you were genuinely present, you are leaving as something sharper, something quieter, something the world will have to reckon with on completely new terms. The only thing that ever separated you from your own power was how you chose to see yourself. That choice has now changed. And when the thinking changes, the world rearranges, every time, without exception. So move, build without announcing, rise without asking permission. Become so completely, so powerfully yourself that the world has no remaining option but to make room for you. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I think differently now." The world will feel it. Because it will. Like, subscribe to Dark Mind Plicit and turn on notifications. The next version of you is already waiting.